Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to do a screen share for a minute, which is going to be, I've never done it, so let me know what you see. Here we go. There we go. All right. Do you guys see it?
Yes, a graphic.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, we are presenting 3 sessions here on Zoom, and we're talking about fostering your kids' educational, emotional, and spiritual growth. So throughout this first one, we're going to kind of talk about the highs and lows that we've had with distance learning. I know that this has been difficult, and I know some are still continuing, some we've finished, but obviously this is going into the summer now. And then we want to talk about how this family time, a lot of family time, how it's really affected everything and all of the relationships with kids. And then Robert, you want to explain the second and third session?
Sorry, the second session, we're going to talk about who we are, what our personalities are, and how to recognize personalities of our kids, and therefore how to communicate with them better. Even at young ages, different kids react different ways. So how can we best respond to them? How can we discipline them more effectively? And how can we talk with them without losing our cool? And then the third session, we're going to try to put all of that together and say, okay, we've got this summer coming up. This is different now. Everything won't be open. We're going to have to perhaps change our vacation plans. How do you manage all those expectations? How do you keep the family together and build on the positive things of this forced confinement? How do you build on the positive things to strengthen the family and to strengthen our kids in their spiritual life and in their emotional life?
Okay. All right. So I want to dive right into the distance learning and kind of what we've learned. And I think that, Rachel, how has distance learning gone with you during this time?
For us, well, we traditionally do a hybrid school. So we usually do Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And so we don't have distance learning because whenever it stopped, the teachers just, I'm facilitating everything now. So it's going okay. Our oldest son has Tourette syndrome, and it's been great for him because it's been more calming. I feel like the environment. For our other son, it's hard because he likes that. So, but even though he was kind of shy, so, but we've had some good times and hard times.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot have had, is that it's like it's a day-to-day thing. Heather, do you want to kind of, I know we had talked on the phone and you had, I feel like, such a great outlook, because I think that parents in general have just like put so much pressure on themselves. And I know I personally have, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my kids are all going to be behind next year. And so I think that you had such a great outlook. So would you kind of share with us, because you've been homeschooling for how many years?
We just finished up our 12th year.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, yeah, if you can just kind of walk us through kind of our conversation that we had.
I'll try to remember everything we talked about. So I started homeschooling Jackson from preschool. And so he just completed his sophomore year. And then Zane's 2 grades behind him. And then Lydia just completed the 1st grade. So one of the things that I wanted to say was that homeschooling doesn't have to mirror a traditional classroom. It doesn't have to mimic what your neighbor or your friends are doing, that you just need to be able to find what works for your family. Whenever we were first quarantined, I saw a lot of things on Facebook, what, the new, if the moms or dads were new to distance learning or homeschooling, all of the activities and the crafts that they were doing. And I just laughed because we haven't done that much in all of our 12 years of homeschooling. I'm pretty low key. So for us, homeschooling is a lifestyle. It's not something that we necessarily separate out from the rest of what we do, just kind of like Jesus is a lifestyle. So it's not like we have our Jesus time and our school time and, whatever. But I follow a curriculum, but anything that doesn't work for us, I just toss it out. So when the boys were little, I would say, would you like to build a replica of Solomon's temple with these popsicle sticks like it suggests? They're like, no, that's dumb. And I'm like, all right, well, we can skip it. So anything that was non-essential or was just enrichment recommendations, I let my children choose whether or not they do that. Now, Lydia loves crafts. So I'm like, here's some paint, or you can use all this glue and kind of whatever she wants to do. I give her some different options. But the boys obviously are different than Lydia. And so what I'm doing with her now is completely different than what I did with them. So one of the things that will be a game changer for any parent is learning what your child's learning style is. So Jackson is an auditory learner. If he hears it, it's going to stick with him. And Zane doesn't really hear what I say ever. And so he's a visual learner, and everything has to come through his eyeballs. Like if he is going to retain it or understand it at all, he has to read it himself. So that meant that 2 years after I started teaching Jackson, that I completely changed how I taught Zane by recognizing that. So when it's just me and my kids, first of all, no one's going to love your kids as much as you do. And so I know them the best. And so I can tell if they're getting something. I can tell if it's not clicking with them, and then I can adjust it accordingly. But the number one thing that you're going to have to realize when you start is you can't be affected by other people's judgment. People are going to judge you no matter what you choose. There's always going to be naysayers, and you just have to let that roll off of your back and do what's best for your family. I'm not sure how much, Natalie, that you want me to start, like with the tips that, for homeschooling, or if you want me to stop and.
Well, so I think the first thing, how do you, I know for me, I've got 3 kids in 3 different grades. And so how far in advance are you kind of organizing your classroom per se? I mean, I was trying to, some days it would be the day before I would get the next day's kind of activities we were going to do. Sometimes it was the morning of, and sometimes it was just as we go. And I mean, how do you organize that, especially when you do have more than one kid in a grade? Because it's all so different.
So the crazy thing is the boys now, I mean, they're pretty self-reliant. So all I have to say to Zane is, go get started on your school. And he is a self-motivated child. Look, he will work. Well, I shouldn't really call him a child anymore. He's a teenager. He's 14. And so I will tell him to get started, and he will self-regulate. And so one day he might say, Mom, I did 10 lessons of math, and I plan on taking the day off tomorrow. And I'm like, that's amazing. Great job. Or I'll say, you need to get started on the book that's assigned. And he's like, I'm already finished with it. So with him, let me just tell you, this is pretty encouraging. Whenever he was a preschool and kindergarten student, he refused to even hold his pencil. He refused. I would try to place the pencil in his hand, and he would just let it fall to the ground. And so I taught him his letters and how to spell his name in a box of rice and in a box of salt. And so I would take his finger and I would trace the way you form the letters. And then one day he just hops up to the counter and wrote his name. He's like, look, Mom, I can write. He also was not the child who would ever stay in a seat. And I just had to be okay with that. Jackson was able to sit for long periods of time, since he was 3. And Zane would kick his chair over. Finally, I just took his chair away. And I told him, you can lay on the floor or you can stand. And when he was doing his math, I'm going to say there's a solid 3 years, he perched himself on his desk. We have school desks, which they've outgrown now. He would perch himself on the desk like a parrot and kind of squat down. But he was doing his math and he was getting it done. And so I had to be willing to let go of what I thought it should look like. And he's very smart. And so of years of giving him the freedom and not confining like how he had to learn, he's knocking it out. He sits at his desk, he sits at the computer, and he works in breaks for his own self. Like, I'll go up there, I'm like, hey, how's math going? He's like, I just finished, but I'm taking a break and watching some YouTube videos about Minecraft. I'm like, all right, that's cool, because I know he's actually going to do his work. So when they were little, though, it's more challenging because, say, I have a first grader and a third grader. So I would get the oldest started on an assignment that I knew that they could do independently. So I would explain their math or whatever it is that they're doing, or writing out their spelling words. And then I would switch over their desk. So I homeschool out of a really comfortable recliner. And then they have their desk, and they would pull them up to me. And so I'd just be able to go just back and forth between the two of them. I also would have something available for them to do in their desk if they had to wait for me, whether it was drawing or maybe they could play with Legos for a little bit. So then they weren't just like, mom.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So I always had something that they knew that they could do while they waited. Something else you can do is when a younger child has to practice their out loud reading, I would bribe Zane, or I guess reward Zane, let your sister read out loud to you. And so with having older kids, they actually help me with teaching Lydia. She was getting started on her math not that long ago, and she had a question, and she didn't even bother coming to find me. Zane just explained how he did it in his mind. And so since he's good at math, I was like, oh, good job, son.
Wow.
We'll just step in and teach that way. But for the younger ones, say you have a toddler that is not in school, and then you have children that you are homeschooling. So I made special things for Zane. The first thing is have baskets of toys or activities that they only get to use during school time. So then they're special. And so you can, at first he wouldn't stay in his room, but once he was, three-ish, 4 maybe, I would say, while I work with Jackson on certain things, you are going to play in your room. And I told you the other day, so it might sound dorky, but that's fine. It really worked for Zane, is your children want to hear your voice the most. So I made him a CD, which I don't know what you do these days. This was like 10 years ago. So I made him a CD using my laptop, and I greeted him. Hi, Zane. I know you're going to be so good today while I work with Jackson. And I alternated between singing a song, a nursery rhyme, teaching different scriptures. And so I would kind of alternate through those things. I taught him the Pledge of Allegiance, the Lord's Prayer. And so I would say all those things. And the CD was like 45 minutes long to an hour. And I would say, you need to stay in your room until your CD is over. And so then he would come out, it's over. Sometimes he'd come out, but other times he would stay in there and play. Now this was not, at this point, he wasn't really like using electronics except watching cartoons. But this was time where he would get out his blocks or his army men or whatever it was that he wanted to play. And that worked really well, because during this time I was teaching Jackson, some elements of learning to read, and we were going over phonics, and it really needed to be quiet. So I did that for.
I love what I really loved what you said is when you said that you had to stop having it look like what you thought it was going to be. And I think that's so, because I think a week into distance learning and my hair going gray, it was, oh, this isn't going to look like a regular classroom. It has to look different. And I love that you've tailored your children because I've got a kid that won't sit still, but he's really bright. So you have to figure out what you're going to let go of. So I love that. And that you've given a couple tips with like dealing with distractions, and you've got one over here. I love having toys and activities just assigned for school. I think that's so important, because if you're right, if they have access to it all the time, it's not special. They'll get bored.
Right.
I know you guys don't sit and say, do you say, I'm going to get 2 hours of school done. We're going to sit and start at 9 and be done at 11. Or are you just constantly doing it throughout the day? How does that look?
Until my boys got into about 7th or 8th grade, we were finished by lunchtime, and they had the whole afternoon free. And so instead of like a schedule, we had more, and it's a little bit different since I have teens now, but we had more of an order of the day. And so it was, they were to get dressed and make their bed before they left their room. And they would come down, and the boys didn't do well if they got any TV time before school. Lydia, she kind of needs a cartoon to wake up, and that's fine, but that's her personality, and then she can move on with the day. The boys just didn't do well with that. So after breakfast, they knew that they would brush their teeth, and we started school right away. They loved their free afternoons, and so they knew that if they buckled down, and it wasn't necessarily an amount of time. So I follow a curriculum, even though sometimes I follow it loosely because a lot of it is kind of extra, not required. And so it lays out each day for me. Like my curriculum it has each day planned. And so when you said, when do I know? So I look over the whole thing when I first get it in the mail, kind of towards the end of summer. But then when I was a newer homeschool mom, I would look over the whole week and kind of decide what we were going to do, what we weren't going to do. We have a lot of things on hand, so I didn't have to buy a lot of extra supplies. But with Lydia, it's a little bit different because, the boys have activities that I'm driving them to. And so once Jackson gets his license, we'll have more time, to sit and do some of the extra things that she likes. But right now she's kind of on a teenager schedule. I mean, it is what it is for the season for us, but the boys had certain things assigned. And so I would tell them, take as long as you need. I don't want to pressure them into thinking they have to do their math faster. However long it takes them to understand it. Then the most important thing for me is that I see that they're learning, that I see that they're making progress. And I'm not a big grades person until high school. I just want to see progress and them understanding it. And so I would say, this is how much math we're going to do. And when we first start in the fall, we double up because come Christmas, we want a little bit extra time. Come spring and it's nice out, they'd rather be finished earlier. And so I would say, instead of one math lesson, I would say, it's still kind of in review. Let's just go ahead and do 2 or 3 math lessons. And when they're having good days and they're eager to learn, then we'll do more. Other days when they want to lay on the floor, I'll say, today we're going to do this amount. And then I can see that you really need to go outside and play. But
that's so important. That's so important. I've talked to so many parents that I feel like I'm forcing my child to do this, and it doesn't work. And I think it creates such a stressful environment. So I love your approach on this. The last thing I want to ask before we move on to our next. So I luckily still have younger ones. My oldest is only in 2nd grade, so I still know enough to help him. But how do you deal with if you're having to teach on a subject that you may not know about? Or even my 2nd grader was doing long division, and they do it differently now, and I don't know how to teach that way. And I mean, how do you deal with that if it's not a strong suit of yours? If you don't know about it, how do you do that?
So first of all, the difference between homeschooling and distance learning is I'm the one who chooses the curriculum, and I have the teacher's guide, the instructions, the answer book, instead of kind of just like, okay, you're in 3rd grade now. I don't know your foundation or building blocks, what the other teachers have done. So it's just kind of like, here's this, good luck. But as far as, so even if I choose it, I mean, obviously high school math and chemistry and things like that. So I'll let you in on this. Nathan is ridiculously smart. And we're a team. And so when I married him because he was so handsome, but I didn't know that later it was really going to be handy how smart he was. And so he's very math and science minded. And even when they were in 5th grade and I couldn't wrap my mind around a concept well enough to teach it clearly, we would just earmark that page and I would say, Dad's going to take a look at that. And so he would come in with a different approach. He might not be flustered at all because he hasn't been teaching them all day. And he's like, oh, this is simple. You're going to get this right away. And so one of the things that I do is you need to utilize the support people in your life. So my dad's a horticulturist. And whenever we were doing botany, oh my goodness, the curriculum, boring, like snoozeville. And so what my kids realize, and it still happens, is we spend time with my parents. And as we're walking through the woods, my dad always takes the time to point out what different trees and plants and leaves are. And so my kids are learning more about nature through Pawpaw than they are through the boring book that they gave us. And so we would collect leaves while my dad was at work. And then I would say, Dad, would you come over? And this is, kindergarten level, maybe even whenever they were doing this simple things. And he would tell the kids what leaf it was, and then he would say, take me to the tree you got it from, and he would explain different things about the bark. And so, learning it that way. Nathan comes in, and Jackson just completed chemistry, and that's right up Nathan's alley. So we have so many people, since homeschooling is like a lifestyle for us, we have so many people who kind of pour into my kids and offer different perspectives that I can't offer. But we just kind of, there's tutors, like you can hire tutors. There was one point that I had some extra, like a reading specialist help us, just in case I was missing something or maybe not using the right approach with one of the boys. We do a homeschool co-op. And so last year, when Jackson, so they do the language arts and the science through the co-op, and they get the instruction that day, and then they work on it all through the week. And so they're actually having different homeschool moms who think differently than I do, who have different strengths than I do, that are helping to teach my children. So it's a group effort. It really does take a village.
That's great. That's good. I didn't honestly think about, obviously I've had my husband kind of help with things, or I don't do well teaching one of my kids. Me and him just clash on teaching things apparently, but that's so good to find other people in your support. So now, we're moving on to summer. Luckily, distance learning is wrapping up. And so I want to talk about how this expanded family time has affected relationships in the family. I feel like we usually have breaks from our spouses and our kids, and it's now just everyone is together. I know my kids have been together every day since mid-March, 24/7, and they've been with us. My husband and I were just talking, they haven't even been to a store. We're an active family other than outside on walks, and they've been to grandma's. They haven't been anywhere. So I know, how has that, and this is for everybody on here, have you found anything? How has that affected you and your spouse and your kids? What have you kind of discovered during this time? Because I know I'm very introverted. This time has not affected me a lot. I'm like, this is cool. I still want like even more alone time. I'm like, I'm just gonna go read a book. And my husband is really extroverted, and so he's just like bouncing off the walls and wants to go anywhere. I think he would have an hour-long conversation with the UPS guy if he could, just because he hasn't had that social interaction. And that's, my kids are, 2 of them are introverted, one's extroverted. So you kind of see that differences. So have you guys discovered anything during this time with spouses and kids?
So my kids are used to being together, and our family is. So we've had a positive addition. Nathan working from home part-time. He works very long hours as a detective. And so I love that whenever, we get up in the morning, that he starts working at the table and we get to have him home. Even though he has to do his work, he still gets to have breakfast and lunch with us. Lydia has loved him being home. So Jackson still works because he is a ranch hand down the street. And so you have to keep feeding animals. That's what it does. So he works with just one other person. And so we have continued to let him work. And so he's gone for a lot of the day. So when we do get to spend time together, it's really treasured. And I know that people said this to me whenever I had only younger kids. You might feel overwhelmed now, but there's going to be a time that you have to fight for time with your children. And so with Jackson, we're kind of at that point. I didn't want to hang out with my mom and dad when I was 16. No way. I'd much rather go with my friends. So he's kind of in that season right now of only go with his friends. He has a job. And yesterday was great because Nathan said, come out of your room. You're spending the whole day with us, and you're going to be nice, and you're going to love your mom extra today. And he did. And it was nice that all of us did something together. With Zane being 14, he's connected with one of his best friends through getting to talk to one another through a video game that they play, and they'll message each other on the iPad. And so he finally got to have, his friend over recently, since they've been apart for so long. But Lydia, she's like, when do I get to see so-and-so? And one, because she likes to hang out with her friends. But one of the things that when we finally were able to, spend time with my parents again, she loves getting extra time with grandma. So that's something special that she gets to do. Zane, since he hasn't had any friends, he has been extra good to his little sister. He will take her outside and jump on the trampoline or make up games with her, let her come in his room and use his Legos. So I've seen, kind of out of boredom, maybe, he has really done some extra things with her. I've liked, that a few things were canceled because I haven't got to, go in the slow lane for a while, being a little bit more on the go with having older boys. So I really enjoyed it. We do time alone every day. And I tell Lydia, you need to ask before you go in your brother's room. And he plays with you a lot and you need to give him some space. And so we try to respect each other's space.
That's
take
great.
rest time every day, whether I just rest in the hammock while the kids play outside or whether I actually go to sleep. And they know that I need a little bit extra rest. They can watch a movie. They can play a game. I'm for letting your kids be bored and them having to figure something out. I'm not about scheduling all of their time. I want them to be able to entertain themselves. So that's kind of like a long-term goal, that they can manage their own time. So
yeah. Rachel, how has it been for you? What have you discovered during this time?
Well, our story is a little bit different. I relate to Heather quite a bit. We, for a long time, we had Liam was in school, and we took Torrin out of full-time school in 3rd grade. He's in 6th grade right now because he was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And it was really hard for him to be in a traditional school where you have to sit and be quiet all day long in a classroom. So we took him out of school, and it was really a positive thing for him. So we traditionally homeschooled before, giving him lots of breaks. We did spelling lessons on the trampoline. We moved around. We're just moving all the time with him. And then I was driving probably 2 hours taking Liam to school back and forth. So we decided to homeschool him.
Yeah.
And, but we felt like he needed a little bit more. So that's where we came to the kind of full-time Monday, Wednesday, every other Friday. And we use a co-op with that for our elective days. So I really relate to Heather. We choose our curriculum for the upper levels. Math and stuff, he gets that all done on Monday and Wednesday before everything shut down for the upper sciences. And then I do rely on my husband. I'm just like you, Heather. I was like, oh, we don't know that math. We'll just mark it. And when Dad gets home, you guys can team up. And it's a beautiful thing because you get to spend a lot of time with your kids. I'm kind of weird. I really like to spend time with our kids, and our family unit is also very close. We spend lots of time together. My older son is kind of annoyed by it sometimes because he's getting older. So when we do family bike rides, but we still make them because I think it's important, especially during this time. Like Heather said, we're used to being together. And so we're home every day now, of course. So we do like reading time in the afternoon. You can find a quiet spot in the house, read your book. And I also get to read and have some alone time where I can read to kind of refresh myself to finish the rest of the day. So I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah.
Take care of yourself, not in a selfish way, but, as a mom, you kind of have to have those breaks. Everybody kind of gets alone time to do a favorite activity, quiet activity in the house, and then we finish out the day.
I really like that because I think that with you guys both of you are so great that you're used to this family time. So I think that you've given all of us, because we're recording these sessions and we're going to make them available later. And I think that both of you have given such good tips, because I think a lot of parents who are not used to that increased time, we're dealing with, anger management with kids getting on each other's nerves. So I love that both of you have had designated alone time, and you go do your thing, you do yours, let's have a little bit of separation. I think that's so good. And I know I was just doing a conference. And so one of the breakouts that I did was they tailored it to during this time and how we can equip parents. And it was so great because it really talked about, even though you're in this time and you have this together time, that you still need special one-on-one time with each of your kids. So I know I've tried to make, my oldest loves board games. So it's, hey, me and Boston are going to play board games. You guys can go jump on the trampoline or do something else, but I'm going to play a game with Boston now. And then it's still trying to find that time together alone, if that makes sense. Because I think that they're used to having alone time with me when some of them are at school, and then, they're coming home and just different activities. So I've tried to find some normalcy in this different time. We're like you guys, we spend a lot of time together, a lot of it because my kids are so young, so they're not pulled in a bunch of different directions. One thing that my family does is we've always done movie nights. We love family movie nights. So every other week we would find a fun family movie, have popcorn, candy, and just be together as a family. And I've really made a conscious effort that during this time, even though we're still together all the time, we still need to carve out those special times together so that they remember that during that time. And that's even my youngest and my middle son wanted to watch a movie one night. And so I set them up in the playroom, and he was so excited. And he said, "It's a family movie night." And I set him up and I started to walk out. And he was like, "You have to watch the movie." He said, "It's not family movie night if you're not here." And I was like, oh my gosh, he's 5 years old and he's already just connecting that this is a big thing. So I think that it's so important to try and just resume some of the normal things you do. And it sounds like all of you guys are doing that. One thing that I want to hear from both of you, because you guys have already managed this for so long and it's so new for people like me and other people watching, too much time on electronics. How are you doing that? Like, I know both me and my husband are working from home now. And so, my husband right now, luckily didn't have any meetings. So he's hanging out with the kids. But on those times where both of us are working, it's like, how do you limit it? Because sometimes I'm just like, I just need to get this done. Cool, grab your iPad for a while. So how are you guys? Do you guys manage electronic time? And I know I don't think there's a right answer to this. I think everyone does what works for them, but I love to hear what other families are doing.
So when the boys were younger, they had certain things that they had to have checked off of a list before they could have any electronic time. And this is before we had an iPad, they had a handheld game contraption called a knobby. And so they had these games that they like to play on their knobby, and they would have the choice of either watching a movie that day or getting X amount of time on their games. And so they had to make that decision, and we were not on the go a whole lot during that season of our life. And so I was able to, they would have to come and ask. They couldn't just, start a movie. I would say, have you tidied your room? Have you read your book? Have you done your chores? And so they had to do all these things before they got any electronic time. And I would set a timer and I would let them know that it was over, or I would say, let me know when your movie's over. So it was a more controlled environment. With Lydia, now I use electronics for my own benefit. So if I have a meeting or a Zoom call, right now she's still asleep. You might see her pop out anytime and wonder what. But I use it to, for whenever I need her to be a little bit more occupied, then I will say, you may play on the iPad. Something I did the other day was, she loves PBS Kids. I would say, you may play on the iPad, but I'm going to need you to use the Bible app before you go ahead and go on your regular game. And so she got a little extra Bible story. The boys, it's a little bit different. Zane has read, he's a big reader. And so he has read, I don't know, since the beginning of the year, maybe a dozen super thick novels of whatever he's into right now, the Percy Jackson and whatever it is. So since he reads, and his room is always clean. He always has his chores done. Then I'm a little bit more lax on the time he spends. I do like to pop in and say, what's that video about? Because they love YouTube. And most of the time it's about like how to do better in Minecraft or whatever. So I don't really give him an amount of time. Sometimes I'll say, you've been on too long, turn it off, do something else. But I force my kids to go outside every day, unless it's just terrible weather or raining. I don't have to force Jackson because he works outside every day, but I will say, turn it off. You at least have to spend an hour outside, and then we'll talk about more electronics later. So ours kind of shifts with our season of life.
Yeah. Rachel, how do you manage electronic time? I know I'm not great at it. I will be the first to say I'm not great at it.
It sounds real similar to what Heather was saying. I feel like I'm just repeating, maybe because, we've homeschooled. You're home a lot. Well, I would say we're not home this much because we usually have an activity every night, music or sports or something like that. So it's been different, but it has to be earned. Screen time always has to be earned in our house. And then we also, I make them go outside. Have you had any outside time? Just to let them know that there's a balance to everything. I think is what I'm trying to say. I don't necessarily put it in those words to them, but we need to be outside, for our health and mental health and all that. We need to get exercise, and it may just, to be honest, it may just be, hey, we have to walk the puppy around the block one time, at least get outside. And some days they do play hours outside. Sometimes they play 15 minutes outside. It just depends on the day. And I think it's a little different with kids when you have kids with special needs, because you kind of have to go on their roller coaster of how they're doing too. So, we kind of manage that. Sometimes our oldest gets a little bit more because he needs that downtime. Yeah. But usually I just set a timer, or I look at the time and say, you have 30 minutes, or you have however long, as long as you've earned it for that day.
That's great.
Made your bed, except on Sunday. We don't make our beds on Sunday, but I'm
going to start implementing that. That's what I'm going to implement. That's awesome.
I'll be honest, it is rough, very rough at first, but after a while you're like, oh, they did it and I didn't have to tell them. But it's rough at first.
I like that concept of earning it, because I think that's something that in traditional schools, they have to earn everything in those schools. And that's something, and I think that sometimes you're so lax at home, but I like implementing that. And I like that you said kind of going outside for mental health and stuff. And I think it's important that we tell kids why we're doing this. Mm-hmm. I think that so many times it's, you can't do this, you need to do this. But I think that's so, it's good to be outside. It's good for your mind. It's good for your body, and letting kids know that, so they know the why behind everything that we're doing, and kind of what extra I've tried to explain, what all this tablet time does. And it's, I've explained we have a cutoff time at night, and I explain, I'm like, no, the blue light, you can't go to sleep. It keeps your mind awake. It's really hard to go to sleep after that. And so I've tried to explain, because they're like, I want to watch YouTube at night. And I'm like, you can't. This is why. So I think that's great. I want to go ahead and wrap up. Robert, do you want to wrap us up on kind of this one?
Yeah, I am delighted with what you both have, all three have said. And I noticed several things perhaps to emphasize for those who are watching the recordings. Number one is you can be more flexible and don't worry about it. A question that came to my mind, and perhaps Heather and Rachel too, you could speak to this. What if Zane, for example, Heather, had been in a regular school, and he's the one that doesn't want to hold the pencil. He's the one that doesn't want to sit at the desk. There are lots of people who may look at this later and they'll come back and say, yeah, I understand what Heather did, but I can't do that. I don't have the possibility of doing homeschooling. How could you help your child who's in a regular school and has that kind of mentality, that kind of activity of action? How would you help them?
So, 10 years ago, I know that they would have encouraged me to put Zane on medication. I do not think that Zane has ADD or ADHD. He is just an active person. And so I don't want to just say active boy, because there are girls who are active too, but they're offering more things in public school and traditional school than they used to. They offer standing desks, and I'm not sure which school districts do this. I got Zane a standing desk one year, and it was just homemade, but I got him a wiggle board. And so I just got it at Walmart out of the sports section, and he was able to stand and do his work and have his wiggle board. So they have some different things in traditional schools that they didn't have maybe when I was in school a very long time ago. But you can, work out a plan with the teacher if they need to be in the back of the room or if they need to be in the front of the room. There's a lot of different choices. And is it called an IEP? Is that what it's called? That you can,
Yeah.
Okay, so I wasn't sure what it was called, but you can, say he learns better or he doesn't hear you if, and so I think if you have a teacher willing to work with you, there are lots of different ways. I don't think they'd let him squat on the desk, but perhaps stand up and, do his work that way.
And I'll speak to. We spoke last week with Dana Smith, who's a school counselor actually at my child's school, and one of the things she was saying was that when the kids start back up school in the fall, and that she wants, tell teachers, hey, this is what really worked for me during this time. This is what we found good, and give the teachers a leg up, because that's what we need. And IEPs, for people wondering, how do I get started with that? My son has gone through, my middle son is autistic. He's high functioning, but so he's in a school, but he still needs kind of that extra help. And so it really is, you call your school district and you can find the number on that, and you say, hey, I think I may need to look into this, and they'll kind of help point you in the right direction. You make an appointment with your pediatrician. We did Sooner Start, which is free up until the age of 3 for kids. And so that's where we were getting therapy. And then we said with our pediatrician, hey, we're seeing regression, and we got referred out to a child psychologist, who then did all of the diagnosis and kind of gave us all of the paperwork we needed to put IEPs and 504 plans into place. And so it's not a fun journey, but if you do need that or see, hey, we're struggling, please. And on the next slide, it'll have my email address. So if you need help getting your kids started, and you suspect that you'll need that for next year with IEPs, because it's really not, it doesn't put your child into this kind of taboo category anymore. But it's like Heather said, some kids just need to stand and do this, and they do as much as they can. They really do tailor that. Even my middle son, they have him in the front row. It was something as easy as that. And it was, hey, he needs to be in the front row for all of this. And that's how you're going to keep his attention on here. Or they had, we had a special, like, it was like a duster. It was a duster, basically. And it was a mop thing. And it was a texture and a sensory thing. And we were able to bring it to school because the school allowed us to. So he had one in the classroom, and the counselor had one. And so when he had trouble going into school on days, he would get to hold it to the classroom. And little things. I think it's important to give teachers those tips. I've told my son's teacher, I said, give him anything red. Red's his favorite color, and it's very important to him. So if you let him hold something red when he's having sensory issues, he's gonna get through it. That's what's gonna help. But I think that open communication with teachers is really important. And I know if you see on the slide, so what we'll kind of talk about tomorrow is why are kids from the same parents so different, which is, my goodness, that is a daily just prayer for me. I'm like, why? I've parented all three of them the same, I feel, but they really are their own people. And then Robert's going to have great tips for understanding yourself and your children, which I think is so important during this time, especially as we enter this summer, which is just different. Whether you have homeschooled, summer just looks different now. I know a lot of summer activities have been closed and are different, and so we're going to kind of be discussing that. Does anyone have any questions or things that they want to say or discuss or any of that?
I'm looking forward to tomorrow.
Yes. I think that these are going to be beneficial, and I think both Heather and Rachel, I think that you've given, because you've successfully homeschooled in different ways, which I love, a hybrid school and then a traditional homeschool. And I think you guys have given hope
Yes.
to parents. And I know, especially to myself, that it's, I think, and I spoke about it yesterday in my sermon, is that grace is what we need. And, not having everything look like how we have it in our head, because it's not going to. And I think that's great. I think you've both done a great job at tailoring your learning to your kids specifically. And I think that is something that all parents need to take away, not just in learning, but just in general. With chores and with summer activities and with all this continued time together, which is going to extend. I mean, it's not like this is all of a sudden over. We're still all together a lot. So I think that you guys have given really great perspective. So I really appreciate both of you with that. And if no one else has anything, I'll kind of wrap us up. So my email is on here. If anyone who's viewing would like to email questions or kind of ask us to dive into anything a little bit deeper, I can get with you on a one-on-one basis and help you with that. Thank you, everyone, for hopping on. I really, really think that this is going to be beneficial during this very strange time. And thank you to Robert for putting this together. I appreciate it.
It's fun. It's going to be great, I think.
I think so. All right.